I had no time to think. The impact came first. The kayak rocked violently. Icy water exploded around me, and then the weight, a living weight, slippery, breathing too fast. When I looked back, dark eyes were just inches from my face. The seal was already on the kayak. She didn't hesitate. She didn't ask for space. She climbed up as if this was the last possible place left to stay. My hands froze on the paddle. If I turned now, I would fall. If I screamed, she might react. The fjord was far too silent for a single mistake. The place offered no help. Black, deep water, cut by near vertical stone walls. Short gusts of wind pushed the kayak slowly toward the center of the fjord. There was no beach, nowhere to swim to. The water temperature could kill in minutes. The seal was breathing heavily, her body trembling against my legs. I could feel the hull sink a few centimeters with every small movement she made. Balance was at its limit. One wrong decision, there wouldn't just be uncomfortable, it would be the end. I tried to stay calm. I loosened my body, lowered my center of gravity, moved the paddle with minimal effort. I whispered something, not for her to understand, but to keep myself from panicking. For a few seconds it worked. The kayak stabilized. The seal stopped moving. She leaned her body against mine as if she was too exhausted to keep fighting. That's when I thought, maybe she's just resting. Maybe that's all this is. If you're feeling this tension with me right now, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which city and country you're watching from. That really helps the channel keep bringing stories like this. Then the fjord revealed the next problem. A deep sound cut through the air, long, low. It came from the water, not the sky. I knew that sound. Other seals, maybe more than one. The seal on my kayak reacted immediately. She lifted her head, twisted her body with effort, and started moving again. The hull rocked hard. Now it wasn't just the weight, it was her instinct waking up. If she jumped suddenly, she would take me down with her. If she stayed, I wouldn't last much longer. The place had created the next impossible choice. She looked at me, not the way a frightened animal looks at a threat. This was different. Her gaze lingered a second longer than it should have. Her breathing slowed, just slightly. The seal pressed her nose against the kayak's hull and stayed there, still, as if she were waiting. I didn't know for what, but for the first time since the impact, I felt that this wasn't an attack, and it wasn't an accident either. It still didn't make sense, and strangely, that was what frightened me the most. The fjord wasn't beautiful in a postcard kind of way. It was too big, too ancient. The rock walls rose almost straight out of the water, marked by dark cracks and soaked moss. In some places, small waterfalls ran directly from stone into the sea, making a constant sound like breathing. The sky hung low and overcast, and the light was cold and diffuse, without clear shadows. There, in the middle of a Norwegian fjord, silence didn't calm you, it pressed in. Everything felt built to outlast any human decision. I tried paddling slowly, barely lifting the blade from the water. The idea was simple: keep balance, move closer to the rock wall, maybe find a shallow strip where she could slide off on her own. But the fjord doesn't cooperate with simple plans. The current shifted without warning. The kayak began to rotate slowly, pointing toward the center, where the water was darker, deeper. The seal felt it before I did. Her body stiffened, her flippers moved, the hull rocked again. The place turned my attempt at escape into another danger. The wind came as if someone had opened an invisible door. It wasn't strong at first, it was deceptive, a steady, sideways push that made the kayak drift where I didn't want to go. The water began to form small whirlpools. They weren't big waves, but they were enough. The seal started breathing faster again, letting out short, sharp sounds. Her body was warm against my cold suit. That's when I realized something. She wasn't just tired. She was at her limit, and the fjord seemed to know it. I stopped paddling. It went against everything I had learned, but continuing was only making it worse. I held the paddle across my body, letting the kayak move with the water for a few seconds. The seal relaxed a little. She pressed the side of her body against my knee. She didn't try to climb down. She didn't try to climb higher. She stayed there, as if that unstable piece of plastic was somehow safe. Her eyes no longer held fear. They held a quiet insistence, as if she were keeping me there on purpose. For a moment I thought waiting would be enough, that the wind would die down, that the other seals would leave, that she would rest and slide back into the water. The fjord felt suspended, almost calm again. But then I saw something ahead, a lighter band of water, moving differently from the rest. A countercurrent, strong, invisible until you were too close. If we entered it, I would lose control completely. And the seal moved at that exact moment, as if she had sensed it before I did. This wasn't ending. It was only changing shape. The kayak entered the current before I could decide anything. There was no impact, just a constant pull, as if the water had grown invisible hands beneath the hull. The paddle lost effectiveness instantly. Every attempt to correct our direction only pushed us deeper into the pale strip, where the fjord accelerated like a river trapped between stone walls. The cliffs of Norway seemed to draw closer visually, but not in reality. They remained distant, tall, indifferent. The seal reacted in a way I didn't expect. Instead of jumping into the water, she shifted even farther toward the center of the kayak, lowering her body, as if shielding herself from something coming from below. That's when I understood the danger wasn't around us. It was underneath. The water changed texture. I couldn't see it clearly, but I could feel it. The kayak vibrated slightly, as if it were gliding over something alive, something dense. The wind stopped abruptly, creating an even stranger silence. The seal lifted her head and let out a short, sharp sound. Not a call, not aggression, a warning. My heart raced as I noticed long shadows moving beneath the surface, too big to be fish, too slow to be seals at play. I thought, this is it. If it was an orca, if it was a larger predator, there was absolutely nothing I could do. The kayak was a toy out there. The seal started moving again, but not in panic. She partially turned back, staring intently at the water, and then did something that chilled me more than the fjord itself. She pressed her body against mine, using weight, using force, as if she were trying to keep the kayak in that exact position. It wasn't escape, it was restraint. Time slowed down. My hands held the paddle without purpose. I just watched. The shadows passed beneath us, more than one. The kayak rocked with the displacement of water, but it wasn't attacked. The seal kept her body low, perfectly still, her nose almost touching the hull. When the water returned to its dark, uniform color, she relaxed again. But she didn't leave. That was the moment everything shifted. She hadn't climbed up just because she was exhausted. She had chosen the kayak. The current began to lose strength, but the place didn't release us. Now another problem took over, cold and exhaustion. My arms were shaking, sensation was fading from my body, even through thermal gear. The seal was breathing better, but she was still far from okay. I noticed marks on her body, fresh scratches, irregular lines that didn't look like rock, maybe teeth, maybe something larger than her. Everything suggested that this encounter hadn't started there. With extreme care, I tried to angle the kayak toward a small indentation in the rock wall. It wasn't a beach, just a spot where the stones sloped a little more gently, forming a slick, wet ledge. With every movement, I felt her weight adjust to mine, as if she were reading my intentions through the smallest shift of the hull. It wasn't obedience, it was silent cooperation. But the fjord didn't give easily. The water surged and pulled back, creating a treacherous back and forth that could drag us right back to the center. When we finally reached the rock, there was no immediate relief. The seal didn't climb down. She stayed there for a few more seconds, completely still, as if she were confirming something. Only then did she slowly slide into the shallow water, unhurried, without looking back right away. I remained frozen, waiting for one last shock. Nothing happened. She swam a few meters away, turned her body, and looked at me one more time. There was no triumph, no clear farewell. Just the unsettling feeling that I had been used, not in a bad way, but in a necessary one. The fjord returned to what it had always been, light wind, cold water, ancient rock. But I knew it wasn't the same place anymore, because in that quiet stretch of Norway, I hadn't saved an animal. I had been chosen by one, and I still didn't fully understand why. My body was slow to respond once everything went still. I stayed there for several minutes, the kayak still pressed against the rock, feeling a fine tremor in my arms and legs. The cold now came from inside, not from the water. I took deep breaths, again and again, until my heart slowed down. When I finally moved, the seal was no longer so close. She swam slowly, tracing a short arc, as if testing the space around her before leaving for good. The fjord looked the same, but it felt like something had been left there with me. Paddling back wasn't easy. Each stroke felt heavier than before. The silence carried a different weight now. The stone walls no longer felt like observers. They felt like they were closing in, narrowing the passage. That's when I noticed something I hadn't seen in the initial chaos. The direction the seal had come from. Farther ahead, there was a section of the fjord where the water became uneven near the base of the rock, as if the bottom were fractured. A bad place to rest. A bad place to escape. Everything suggested she had been trying to get out of there, not reach it. The more I thought about it, the more the story rearranged itself in my mind. The seal hadn't climbed onto the kayak because it was the closest object. She had ignored rocks, ignored shallow water, ignored her own group. She had chosen something unstable, human, unfamiliar. Something that moved, something that could leave that stone corridor behind. Her exhaustion made sense. The marks on her body made sense. Even the moment she pressed against me, keeping the kayak from turning, took on a new meaning. She wasn't asking for help. She was executing a decision. The real danger hadn't passed. It had only become invisible. Large predators don't announce themselves after a failed approach. They wait. The fjord, with its curves and shadows, favors those who do. I could feel it in my body. A tension without a name. Even without seeing anything in the water, I paddled as if I were still being followed. The seal, now farther away, surfaced from time to time, always on the same side, always keeping a precise distance. It wasn't coincidence. She was escorting. At a certain point, the fjord began to open up. The walls grew less vertical. The light shifted. The wind started moving again. The water lost that heavy, dense feel. That was where the seal finally moved away for good, swimming straight ahead without hesitation. Just before disappearing, she turned her body one last time. It wasn't a dramatic gesture. It was almost technical, like someone confirming that the crossing was complete. Only then did I realize how close to the edge my body really was. When I reached a safe area, I pulled the kayak in and sat on the rock for a long time. The distant sound of water hitting stone felt ordinary again. But inside me, something had changed. I couldn't shake the feeling that the seal hadn't just escaped something that day. She had learned. She had linked movement, instability, and direction to survival. And by chance, I had been there at the exact moment that memory needed to be used. The fjord fell behind me as I began the return. But the story didn't end there. Because no matter how many times I replay what happened, I always arrive at the same uncomfortable conclusion. That day, in an ancient and indifferent place in Norway, the line between animal instinct and conscious decision grew far too thin for me to pretend I hadn't seen it. And I left, knowing I was never the protagonist of that crossing. I was only the means. The problem is that stories like this don't end when the immediate danger fades. They end when the body understands that it's over, and mine still didn't. The fjord was wider now, but that brought a different kind of risk. Distance. If something happened out there, there would be no wall to brace against, no reference point. Just cold water as far as the eye could see. I kept paddling. Not fast, not slow. At a pace I knew I could sustain if things went wrong again. Every few seconds I glanced over my shoulder, even though I didn't expect to see anything. That's when I heard the sound. It didn't come from the water, it came from the air. A powerful breath followed by another, farther away. I stopped paddling on instinct, watched the surface. Nothing. Waited. The sound came again, clearer now. Breathing. Too large to belong to a seal. My stomach dropped. It wasn't a direct pursuit, it was presence, the kind that doesn't need to attack to control the space. I didn't see the seal at that moment, and that was the most unsettling part. She had vanished too quickly. The decision that followed wasn't brave, it was practical. I pointed the kayak toward the nearest shoreline that offered a real exit. It wasn't beautiful, it wasn't comfortable. It was a stretch of slick, uneven rocks. But it allowed me to get out of the water. Paddling toward it meant abandoning any idea of experience or control. It meant admitting I wasn't prepared for what that place could still reveal. The fjord didn't care. The water kept moving the way it wanted to. When I finally pulled in, there was no final impact, just the dry sound of the hull touching stone. I dragged the kayak with effort, feeling my body protest. My hands ached, my shoulders burned. When I finally stood up, my legs nearly gave out. I leaned my weight against the rock and stayed there, breathing, staring at the water, as if it could still decide something for me. That's when the seal reappeared. She surfaced farther away than before, already in open water. She came up only once, looked in my direction. She didn't come closer. She didn't need to. That was the end of the shared line between us. She had used what she needed to use. I had played a role I hadn't consciously chosen. There was no symbolic exchange, no final gesture, just separation. And strangely, that brought relief. The sound returned one last time, farther away now. I didn't see anything large break the surface, but I felt the movement in the water, a long, slow, powerful swell. The seal dove immediately and didn't surface again as far as I could see. That was when the final piece fell into place. She wasn't just escaping the place, she was escaping something that was still there. And the kayak, fragile, strange, human, had been the only unlikely route available. I stayed there a while longer before leaving. The place didn't look any different. No marks, no clear sign of what had happened. But I knew that crossing had left something in me, not as trauma, as an adjustment, a quiet correction in how I understand encounters between species, not help, not dominance. Sometimes just functional coincidence at the exact moment. When I finally moved away, the fjord remained as it always had been, ancient, indifferent, intact. But I knew that if I ever passed through there again, I would never look at the surface of the water the same way. Because that day, in that place, I learned something simple and uncomfortable. Nature doesn't ask permission when it needs to survive. It just finds paths, even if those paths run, for a few minutes, right over you. I thought I would leave carrying only the memory, but that wasn't what happened. In the days that followed, the seal kept returning to my mind at unexpected moments. Not as a specific image, but as a persistent feeling, the sense of having taken part in something that didn't belong to me. The more I thought about it, the more I realized the encounter hadn't been extraordinary because of danger, but because of choice. She chose to trust something that wasn't part of her world, and that isn't common in nature. A few weeks later, I returned to that fjord, not out of courage, out of a need to understand. The place looked different, clearer weather, more predictable water, almost no wind. Tourists passed in the distance on larger boats, taking photos, laughing. The fjord felt safe, almost gentle, and that's what struck me the most. Nothing there betrayed what had happened. Places don't keep visible memories. Survivors do. I stood watching the water for a long time, looking for something I knew I probably wouldn't see. No seal, no larger shadow beneath the surface, just movement, just life continuing forward. That's when I felt something I hadn't felt on the day it happened. Gratitude, not for having helped, but for having been included, even by chance, in a decision that saved a life that wasn't my own. I finally understood what that seal had been trying to show me. It wasn't fear, it wasn't a request, it was urgency. The instinctive recognition that sometimes survival requires crossing the improbable, climbing where it doesn't make sense, trusting where there are no guarantees, using what exists, not what's ideal. That wasn't weakness, it was adaptation at the edge. Before leaving, I placed the kayak back in the water one last time. I didn't get in, I just let the hull touch the surface. I watched the ripples spread and disappear quickly, like everything in that place. I thought that somewhere in that fjord, or somewhere entirely different, that seal might be swimming now, alive, alert, carrying in her body the memory of a strange object that for a few minutes became a path. The fjord remained there, ancient, indifferent, larger than any human story. But I was no longer the same person who had entered that water for the first time. Because that day in Norway, I learned something no trail, no book, and no video teaches very well. Nature doesn't create emotional endings for those who observe. It creates second chances for those who manage to cross fear. And by chance, I was there when one of them passed right over my kayak.